Imagine trying to sleep in a room where 10 people are already breathing, whispering, and turning in the dark. Your parents, your siblings, the household servants, and maybe even a traveller who paid for shelter. In 13th century England, this wasn't unusual. Privacy was almost non-existent, and night did not belong to individuals. It belonged to the entire household. To understand how people in England lived during the 1200s, we have to set aside modern expectations about privacy. Today, most homes are designed around the idea that every person should have a personal space. Separate bedrooms, closed doors, quiet corners. But in medieval England, especially among ordinary people, the house itself was often just a single room where nearly every aspect of daily life happened together. Most rural homes were small timber structures built using a technique known as wattle and daub. Wooden frames were filled with woven sticks, then coated with a mixture of mud, clay, straw, and animal dung to seal the walls. The roofs were thatched with straw or reeds, which provided some insulation but also allowed drafts and smoke to escape through small gaps. Chimneys were rare in simpler homes, so smoke from the central hearth drifted upward and filtered slowly through the roof. Inside, the room served many purposes at once. During daylight hours, it was a kitchen, workshop, dining area, and social space. A fire burned in the hearth at the center of the room, used for cooking and warmth. Pots hung above the flames, and benches or simple stools surrounded the fire. Tools, baskets, and spinning wheels might be scattered around the space, depending on the work being done that day. But when darkness arrived and the fire burned low, the same room became the sleeping quarters for the entire household. Beds, as we imagine them today, were uncommon for most people. Instead, families used simple straw mattresses known as palliaces. These were sacks stuffed with straw, dried grass, or leaves. During the day, they were often rolled up or pushed aside so the floor could be used for work and cooking. At night, they were spread across the floor for sleeping. The floor itself was usually covered with rushes, which were dried plants scattered across the ground. Rushes helped soften the dirt floor and absorb moisture, but over time they collected food scraps, dust, and animal droppings. Fresh layers were sometimes added on top rather than completely replaced, meaning the flooring could become surprisingly dirty. Sleeping arrangements were crowded by modern standards. Parents and children often shared the same mattress or slept side by side. Several siblings might lie together under a single blanket. Personal space simply wasn't part of the design of everyday life. Warmth was one of the reasons people slept so close together. Medieval houses were poorly insulated, and winters in England could be bitterly cold. Sharing body heat made sleeping conditions more comfortable, and sometimes even necessary for survival during freezing nights. The situation could become even more crowded in larger households. In manor houses or the homes of wealthier farmers, there was often a large central room called the Great Hall. This hall functioned as the heart of the household. Meals were eaten there, visitors were welcomed there, and household business was conducted there. When night came, many servants slept directly on the floor of the hall. They might lie near the hearth for warmth, or wrap themselves in cloaks or blankets. If travellers arrived seeking shelter, they might also be allowed to sleep in the same space. It wasn't unusual for a single room to contain a dozen sleeping people. Even sharing beds with others outside the immediate family was not considered strange. In medieval culture, a bed was not always viewed as a private object. Historical accounts describe guests, servants, and even acquaintances sharing the same bed simply because space was limited and bedding was expensive. For higher status families, there was sometimes one small retreat from the crowded hall. This room, called the solar, was usually located on an upper floor. The lord of the house and his family might sleep there, keeping them slightly separated from the activity below. But even the solar was not truly private. Servants entered regularly to deliver food, maintain fires, or manage clothing and household duties. Visitors could also be received there. True privacy, the idea of closing a door and being completely alone, was something that most people in medieval England rarely experienced. Nighttime inside these homes was filled with sound: the crackling of the fire, the rustle of straw mattresses, quiet conversations, snoring, coughing, and the wind pushing against the walls. Darkness came quickly once the fire dimmed, because candles were expensive and usually saved for important tasks. So people slept, or at least they tried to sleep in a room full of others sharing the same air, warmth, and space. For them, this crowded life was not uncomfortable or strange. It was simply the way the world worked. When people today imagine life in medieval England, they often picture a world where no one bathed and everything smelled unbearable. The reality was more complicated. Hygiene in the 1200s was not the same as modern standards, but medieval people were not completely indifferent to cleanliness. They understood the importance of washing, fresh air, and maintaining a respectable appearance, though their methods were shaped by limited resources and the realities of daily life. Water itself was not difficult to find in most parts of England. Rivers, streams, and village wells supplied households with water for drinking and washing. But heating water required time and fuel, and both firewood and labour were valuable. Because of this, full-body bathing did not happen every day for most people. Instead, medieval people practiced what historians sometimes call partial washing. Each morning, individuals might wash their hands and face using a small basin of water. This was often done before meals as well. In wealthier homes, servants would bring a bowl and a towel to the table so members of the household could clean their hands before eating. Clean hands were important, especially because people ate many foods with their fingers. Soap did exist in medieval England, though it was not as refined as modern soap. Early soaps were made from animal fat, mixed with alkaline substances like wood ash or lye. These soaps were coarse and sometimes harsh on the skin, but they helped remove grease and dirt. Even when soap was not used, water alone was considered helpful for washing the body. Bathing itself usually happened in wooden tubs. In poorer households, these tubs might simply be large barrels filled with warm water heated over the hearth. Because heating water took time, several members of the household often used the same bath water one after another. While this may seem unpleasant today, it was a practical way to conserve fuel and labour. Public bathhouses also existed in some medieval towns, particularly during the earlier part of the Middle Ages. These bathhouses allowed people to soak in heated water and wash themselves more thoroughly. However, by the later medieval period, many bathhouses declined in popularity due to concerns about disease and morality. Clothing also played a role in personal hygiene. Medieval people changed their linen undergarments more frequently than their outer clothing. Linen shirts and shifts were worn directly against the skin and helped absorb sweat and oils. Washing these garments regularly was an important way of staying clean, even when full bathing was less common. Laundry itself was hard work. Clothes were scrubbed with water and soap in wooden tubs, then beaten against stones or boards to remove dirt. After washing, garments were hung outside to dry in the open air. Sunlight and fresh air were valued not just for drying clothes, but also for reducing unpleasant smells. Another aspect of hygiene involved hair care. People often combed their hair daily to remove dirt and lice. Fine-toothed combs made of bone or wood were common personal items. Lice were a persistent problem across all social classes, but regular grooming helped manage infestations. The interior of medieval homes also influenced hygiene. Floors covered in rushes could become dirty over time, especially when food scraps and debris fell into them. Periodically, these rushes were replaced with fresh ones. New rushes were sometimes mixed with herbs such as lavender or mint to create a more pleasant smell inside the house. Even in large manor houses, cleanliness was an ongoing challenge. Animals such as dogs or chickens sometimes wandered indoors, bringing mud with them. Smoke from the hearth coated walls and ceilings with soot. Dust and dirt were unavoidable parts of daily life. Yet medieval people were not unaware of these issues. Household manuals from later centuries describe sweeping floors, airing bedding, and keeping living spaces as clean as possible. One of the most difficult hygiene problems involved human waste. In rural homes, there were rarely dedicated toilet rooms. People often used simple chamber pots at night, which were emptied outside in the morning. During the day, many simply went outdoors away from the house. In castles and larger stone buildings, there were sometimes primitive toilets called garderobes. These were small chambers built into the wall, where waste dropped down a vertical shaft into a pit or moat below. While not particularly sanitary by modern standards, they represented an attempt to manage waste more effectively. Despite these limitations, medieval people cared about appearance and social respectability. Clean hands, tidy clothing, and groomed hair were signs of good character and proper upbringing. In a world where people slept together in crowded rooms and shared living spaces with many others, basic hygiene mattered. Not only for comfort, but for maintaining dignity within a community where everyone lived so closely side by side. In medieval England, the experience of privacy depended greatly on social class, but even the wealthiest people lived far more publicly than we would expect today. The idea that every person should have their own bedroom, their own personal space or time completely alone was not part of medieval culture. Life was shared, meals were shared, work was shared, and even sleep was shared. For most ordinary villagers, the home was still the single multi-purpose room described earlier. Families might consist of parents, several children, and sometimes elderly relatives, all living within the same space. Privacy between family members barely existed. Conversations, arguments, laughter, and daily routines all happened within earshot of everyone else in the house. But the situation changed slightly when we look at wealthier households. Large manor houses and castles were built around a central communal space, known as the Great Hall. This hall functioned as the main center of life for the entire household. Long wooden tables were set up for meals, benches lined the walls, and a large hearth burned constantly in the center or at one end of the room. During the day, the hall was full of activity. Servants moved back and forth carrying food, craftsmen repaired tools or armor, and members of the household discussed business, land, or legal matters. Visitors and travelers might also be welcomed into the hall, since hospitality was considered an important social duty during the medieval period. When night arrived, the Great Hall often became a sleeping space for many people. Servants typically laid down simple bedding directly on the floor near the walls or close to the hearth, where warmth remained longest. Some servants slept wrapped in cloaks or blankets, while others used straw mattresses similar to those used in village homes. Because many manor households employed dozens of workers, the hall could become quite crowded at night. Despite the higher social status of the lord and his family, they still lived within this shared environment. However, wealthy households did have one architectural feature that introduced a limited form of privacy. This was the solar, an upper room usually located above the Great Hall. The solar served as the private chamber for the lord of the house and his immediate family. Compared to the hall below, the solar was quieter and more comfortable. It might contain a proper wooden bed frame with ropes or leather supports, a mattress stuffed with feathers instead of straw, and thick blankets or furs to keep warm during winter nights. Windows in the solar sometimes had shutters or oiled cloth coverings to reduce drafts. The solar also functioned as a place for activities that required a calmer environment. Women of the household might sew, read religious texts, or supervise children there. Important documents and valuable possessions could be stored safely away from the busy hall. But even this room did not provide the level of privacy we associate with modern bedrooms. Servants still entered the solar regularly to tend fires, bring food, clean clothing, and assist the household. Messengers or visitors could be invited there for meetings. The door might close, but the room remained part of a busy household system. Another important difference between medieval and modern ideas of privacy involves social attitudes towards the body and daily routines. In medieval society, many activities that we consider private today were far less hidden. Dressing, bathing, and sleeping often happened in shared spaces, especially within families or among servants. Even among the nobility, sharing beds was common. Guests staying overnight might be invited to sleep in the same bed as the host if space was limited. Historical accounts describe kings, nobles, and travelers sharing beds without embarrassment. Beds were valuable pieces of furniture, and offering a place in one was seen as a sign of hospitality. The concept of individual personal space simply had not developed yet. Instead, medieval society placed greater emphasis on community and hierarchy. A household functioned as a unit where everyone had a role. Lords managed land and authority, servants performed labor, and families worked together to survive. Living closely together reinforced these relationships. Privacy began to change slowly toward the end of the medieval period and into the early modern era. As houses grew larger and architectural designs evolved, more rooms were added for specialized purposes. Bedrooms gradually became more separate from public living areas. But in the 1200s, that transformation had not yet taken place. For the average person in England, life was lived almost entirely in the presence of others. Nights were spent surrounded by family members, servants, and sometimes strangers, sharing the same roof. The sounds of breathing, the warmth of bodies, and the glow of the dying hearth fire were all part of the nightly rhythm. In a world where survival depended on cooperation and shared resources, privacy was not a basic expectation. It was a rare luxury, and for most people, it simply did not exist.